Deception has been a part of warfare since humans first began taking to the fields of battle to engage in their horrific favorite pastime. From ancient Egypt to modern times, deception has been used by armies across time and across the globe to gain an advantage over their adversaries. And while deception in warfare can be a legitimate tactic, some forms of deception are not and can in fact be considered a war crime. During the Battle of the Bulge, the Germans towed the line between deception and war crime and in some instances may have crossed into war crime territory as it relates to their deceptive tactics in this particular battle. The Battle of the Bulge, also known as the Ardennes Offensive, was the last major offensive attempted by Germany on the Western Front. It was launched through the densely forested Ardennes region between Belgium and Luxembourg. The primary German military objectives were to deny further use of the Belgian port of Antwerp to the Allies and to split the Allied lines. If these objectives could be achieved, the German military could potentially have encircled and destroyed the four Allied forces on the Western Front. If this happened, it was hoped by Adolf Hitler that the Allies would be compelled to accept a peace treaty in Germany's favor, which would then allow Germany to throw all its forces to the Eastern Front and prevent the imminent invasion of Germany by the Soviet Red Army. Germany would begin this offensive with 410,000 men, just over 1,400 tanks, tank destroyers, and assault guns, 2,600 artillery pieces, and over 1,000 combat aircraft, as well as a large number of other AFVs. Operation Greif would be part of this major offensive. It was to be a special operation meant to capture one or more bridges over the Meuse River and to cause confusion and mayhem in the rear of the Allied lines. This was to be done with English-speaking German soldiers wearing captured Allied uniforms, weapons, and equipment in captured Allied vehicles. These specialized troops would form Panzer Brigade 150 and could be commanded by Waffen-SS Commando Otto Skorzeny. For this operation, 15 Allied tanks were requested, 20 armored cars, 20 self-propelled guns, 100 jeeps, 40 motorcycles, 120 trucks, and enough British and U.S. Army uniforms, weapons, and equipment for every soldier, of which there were to be 3,300. Of this request, the unit only received 2 Sherman tanks in poor condition and Polish and Russian equipment. To help deal with this wild setback in equipment procurement, Panzer Brigade 150 would disguise between 5 and 10 available German Panther tanks as American M10 tank destroyers. The M10 and the Panther don't really look anything alike. In fact, the M10 isn't even a tank. It's a fast, thin-armored, open-top tank destroyer, whereas the Panther is a slow, heavily armored, medium tank, borderline heavy tank, quite a bit larger than the M10. Both were designed in 1942 with similar numbers produced, around 6,000, but each was meant for a different purpose. The M10 was built as a tank destroyer. Tank destroyer units were meant to counter German blitzkrieg tactics. They would be held in reserve behind the battle line and were to move quickly to the site of any massed enemy tank breakthrough. They would maneuver quickly and aggressively, employing ambush tactics to engage enemy armored units. Prohibited from charging or chasing enemy tanks, tank destroyers were fast and well armed, but were thinly armored to allow for their speed. Speed and agility was their defense. The M10 was designed in 1942 and produced until 1943. The lower hull was a modified Sherman M4A2 hull. It had thin sloped armor ranging from 9.5mm to 57.2mm in thickness. The glacis was sloped at 55 degrees, with the sides sloped at 38 degrees. The open-topped rotating turret was pentagonal shaped with sides sloped at 15 degrees. The gun shield was triangular shaped and sloped at 45 degrees. The M10 was powered by a General Motors 6046 twin diesel engine capable of producing 375 horsepower at 2100 RPM. It had a synchro mesh 5-speed transmission and a vertical volute spring suspension. A 165 US gallon fuel capacity gave the M10 an operational range of 160 miles and an on-road max speed of between 25 and 30 miles per hour. Its primary armament was a 3-inch anti-tank gun. It could carry 54 rounds of ammo for this gun. A single 50 caliber machine gun was mounted to the turret for anti-infantry and anti-aircraft use along with 300 rounds of ammunition. The M10 weighed 29.6 tons. It had a length of 22 feet 5 inches, a width of 10 feet, and a height of 9 feet 6 inches, which included the anti-aircraft gun, and had a 5-man crew. The Panther, on the other hand, was designed to replace the Panzer III and the Panzer IV and was meant to be a direct counter to the Soviet T-34 tank. It was intended to be a lighter, more agile tank when compared to the Tiger I, with an initial weight goal of 20 tons. But by the time it was completed, it weighed almost 45 tons as a result of larger guns and more armor. This weight was close to the Tiger I's initial design weight of 50 tons. The Panther was designed in 1942 and produced from 1943 through 1945 for the German military. The Panther's armor ranged in thickness from 16 mm to 100 mm. The glacis was sloped at 55 degrees. Some Panthers had spaced armor attached to their flanks to help defend against Soviet anti-tank rifles. From September of 1943 to September of 1944, Panthers had a Zimmerit coating to protect against magnetic mines. It had a curved 100 mm thick cast turret. The turret also featured a commander's cupola with a steel hoop to which an MG-34 could be mounted for anti-aircraft defense. The Panther was armed with the 7.5 cm KWK-42L70 main cannon, which it carried 79 rounds for. It had a secondary armament in the form of two MG-34 machine guns. One was bow-mounted and the other was coaxially located with a cannon. It carried 5,100 rounds of ammunition for these guns. The Panther had a V12 petrol Maybach HL230P30 engine capable of producing 690 horsepower. It had a 7-speed ZF AK7-200 transmission. The suspension was a double torsion bar interleaved road wheels design. With a fuel capacity of 190 US gallons, the Panther had an operational range of 160 miles on the road and only 62 miles cross-country. This gave it a max speed of between 29 miles per hour and 34 miles per hour depending on the model. The Panther had a weight of 44.8 tons, a length of 28 feet 5 inches, a width of 10 feet 9 inches without skirts and 11 feet 3 inches with skirts, a height of 9 feet 10 inches, and a 5-man crew. To make the Panthers look like M10s, quite a few cosmetic changes needed to be made. Sections of sheet metal were cut to mirror the M10's turret. These were flanged and bent into shape. The sheets of metal were supported with iron bars and the framework was welded to the turret. Smaller details such as lifting eyes, brackets, and attachment points for applique armor were replicated. A false gun shield with the hole drilled out to make room for the Panther's coaxial machine gun was manufactured and welded to the Panther's own gun shield. To lower the turret profile and make the silhouette more closely match the M10, the commander's cupola was removed and replaced with a 2-piece hinged hatch, greatly reducing the commander's visibility when the tank was buttoned up. The bow of the M4 Sherman had an iconic look in the form of its bulbous transmission housing. To replicate this, sheet metal was carefully formed and welded to the Panther's bow. More sheet metal was welded over the glacis with the door cut out and attached to a chain so the bow-mounted MG-34 could still be used. Towing eyes and brackets were also added in the appropriate locations. The Panther's Schrutzen side armor was removed and long pieces of sheet metal were cut and welded horizontally along the flanks to replicate the sloping side armor of the M10. All the Panther's external stowage was removed and replaced with 3 blocks of spare track links to further mimic the appearance of the M10. A false rear was also fabricated out of sheet metal and welded to the rear of the Panther. This replaced the stowage boxes on the Panther. It also covered the Panther's exposed external exhaust stacks, which the M10 didn't have. Holes had to be cut in the false rear to make room for the exhaust pipes. A replica of the M10's fixed gun rest was also added to this false box. The M10 carried its Pioneer tools on the rear of the tank, but there doesn't seem to be any mention of the Ersatz M10 replicating this feature. Nothing could be done about the Panther's overlapping road wheels, the thickness of the tracks, or the overall larger size of the Panther. Finally, the Panthers were painted in typical olive drab used on U.S. Army vehicles, and Allied star markings were applied to the upper glacis, the sides, and the roof of the turret. False unit markings were applied to the bow and the rear. And with that, the Ersatz M10 was complete and ready for battle. When the operation kicked off, only 2,500 men were available of the requested 3,300. Only 10 could speak perfect English, 30 to 40 spoke English but didn't know any English slang, 120 to 150 spoke moderately well English, and the rest of the men spoke little to no English. The best English speakers were assembled into a commando unit, and the brigade only received enough Western Allied equipment to outfit this commando unit. Of the Allied vehicles requested, only 4 U.S. Army scout cars, 30 jeeps, and 15 trucks, and 1 working Sherman could be acquired. The rest of the vehicles were German vehicles disguised as American, including at least 2 Stug 3s, but these didn't even come close to looking anything like what the Allies had. The main objective of Panzer Brigade 150 was to attempt to capture at least 2 of the bridges over the Meuse River before they could be destroyed. The commando unit dressed as Americans had 3 primary missions: destroy bridges, ammunition dumps, and fuel stores, pass on bogus orders to any U.S. units they encountered, reverse road signs, remove minefield warnings, and block roads with warnings of mines where none actually existed, disrupt U.S. chain of command by destroying field telephone wires and radio stations and issuing false orders. Panzer Brigade 150 moved out behind three panzer divisions, which were the 1st SS Panzer Division, the 12th SS Panzer Division, and the 12th Volksgrenadier Division. When the three panzer divisions reached the high fens, Panzer Brigade 150 was to break off and begin its mission. However, the 1st SS Panzer Division failed to reach its starting point quickly enough, and with that, the main purpose of Panzer Brigade 150 completely collapsed. Panzer Brigade 150's commander attended a staff conference meeting on 17 December at 6th Panzer Army's headquarters requesting that his brigade be used as a regular army unit. This request was granted. On 21 December, the brigade, acting as a regular army unit, attempted to take Malmedy. Several assaults were made by Panzer Brigade 150, but they were repelled by the U.S. defenders. 4 of the 5 Ersatz M10s were knocked out during the battle, and none would survive the war. When investigating the destroyed tanks, American uniforms including helmets, overcoats, and trousers were found inside. The Ordnance Intelligence Department felt that had the tanks been deployed with a bit more care and cover, they could have been extremely effective and dealt considerable damage. Even though Panzer Brigade 150 failed in its main objectives, the brigade did have some success. After his surrender, Skorzeny reported that one of his commando teams was able to enter Malmedy on 16 December. A second team managed to persuade a U.S. Army unit to withdraw from Poteau, Belgium. A third team was able to send an entire U.S. regiment in the wrong direction by switching around road signs. 44 German soldiers wearing American uniforms made it through U.S. lines. Panzer Brigade 150 caused enough mayhem and confusion that the U.S. Army saw spies and saboteurs everywhere. Several U.S. soldiers were killed in friendly fire incidents from the resulting paranoia. One of the captured commando teams gave credence to the rumor that Panzer Brigade 150's true mission was to capture and/or kill Allied Supreme Commander General Eisenhower. As a result, an unamused General Eisenhower spent Christmas of 1944 isolated for security reasons. The confusion and paranoia caused by Panzer Brigade 150 ultimately had very minimal impact on the course of the war. The German soldiers captured wearing American uniforms were executed as spies. After World War II, Skorzeny was tried as a war criminal during the Dachau trials in 1947 for allegedly violating laws of war during the Battle of the Bulge. He was charged with improperly using U.S. uniforms by entering into combat disguised therewithin and treacherously firing upon and killing members of the armed forces of the United States, as well as participation in wrongfully obtaining U.S. uniforms and Red Cross parcels consigned to U.S. prisoners of war from a prisoner of war camp. He would be acquitted as it couldn't be proven that Skorzeny ordered his men to fight in U.S. uniforms, which would have been a war crime. Wearing enemy uniforms for concealment and deception, as long as no fighting is done in said uniforms, is a legitimate tactic of deception called a ruse of war. To be clear, you can legitimately wear enemy uniforms during a time of war, but as soon as you fight the enemy wearing their uniform, it becomes a war crime and any troops captured in enemy uniforms can be executed as spies. This should apply to captured vehicles as well. A captured Sherman can be used with Allied markings for movement, but right before the captured Sherman engages in combat, it must display the markings of the crew's allegiance, so in this case, the German Army. But what about the Ersatz M10? Those weren't captured Allied vehicles. They were German Panthers disguised to look like Allied vehicles. As is evidence from the available photos, the tank crews didn't display German markings on the tanks before battle. They very clearly had Allied stars on them. If the tank crews are wearing US uniforms, then yes, it's a war crime, but what if the tank crews were wearing German uniforms while fighting from a German tank made to look like an American tank destroyer? The line starts to blur. It's not known if any of the Ersatz tank crews were captured. Parts of U.S. uniforms were found inside some of the tanks, but it's not known if any tank crew members were actually wearing them during battle. It's hard to believe they would change out of U.S. uniforms after their tank was knocked out during the battle, even knowing they could be executed as spies if captured in U.S. uniforms. The immediate survival need to get out of the tank would take priority over the thought of if they got captured. Is fighting from an Allied marked German tank a war crime regardless of what the crew wears? No crew members appeared to have been captured, so this question wasn't brought to the courts. In the end, at least 18 members of Panzer Brigade 150 would be tried and executed as spies via firing squad. Skorzeny and 9 of his officers would be charged with war crimes but would be acquitted. Operation Greif is the only known instance of the Ersatz M10 participating in battle.